I've always loved Christmas, but the holidays had felt hollow since Margaret passed away 3 years ago. Our house in suburban Connecticut, once filled with laughter and warmth, had grown quiet, too quiet. My son David tried his best, inviting me to spend Christmas with his family in Boston, but I'd declined the last 2 years. Grief is a strange companion. Sometimes it makes you push away the very people you need most. But this year was different. I finally said yes. Snow fell gently outside the window of David's colonial-style home as I sat at the dining table, surrounded by the cheerful chaos I'd been avoiding. My son carved the turkey, while his wife Elena arranged side dishes on the table. Their children, 16-year-old Jason glued to his phone, 12-year-old Lily setting the table, and 7-year-old Sophie bouncing around the room in her Christmas dress, created that beautiful family dissonance I'd missed more than I realized. "Dad, I'm glad you're here," David said, resting his hand on my shoulder. His eyes, so much like his mother's, crinkled at the corners. He'd aged in these past years, silver threading through his temples. "Me too, son," I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. "Smells just like your mother's cooking." Eleanor smiled from across the table. "That's because I'm using Margaret's recipes. She made me promise to take good care of you boys." Dinner was a blur of flavors and conversation. Jason occasionally looked up from his phone to answer questions about school. Lily told elaborate stories about her science projects. Sophie, my youngest grandchild, watched me with curious eyes from across the table. There was something in her gaze, an intensity that reminded me of Margaret. As we finished the main course, David raised his glass. "To Mom," he said simply. "We miss you every day." "To Grandma," the children echoed, even Jason putting down his phone for the toast. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, that constriction that came whenever I allowed myself to really feel Margaret's absence. I reached for my water glass, needing something to hold on to. That's when it happened. "Grandpa," Sophie said suddenly, her voice cutting through the momentary silence. "Look under the chair." The table went quiet. Sophie was staring at me, her expression serious in a way that seemed beyond her years. "What's that, sweetheart?" I asked, thinking she was starting some kind of children's game. "The chair you're sitting on," she insisted. "Look underneath it. Grandma told me to tell you." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. David and Elena exchanged concerned glances. "Sophie," Elena began gently, "what do you mean?" "In my dream last night," Sophie explained matter-of-factly. "Grandma was there. She had on her blue dress, the one with the flowers. She told me to tell Grandpa to look under the chair during Christmas lunch." She looked around at our stunned faces. "She said he would know what it means." My hands started trembling. Margaret's favorite dress had indeed been a blue one with small white flowers. We'd buried her in it. I'd never shown Sophie pictures of Margaret in that dress. She'd been too young to remember her grandmother. "Sophie, honey," David said carefully, "it was just a dream." But I was already pushing back my chair, ignoring the twinge in my arthritic knees as I bent down. The chair was an antique, one of a set that Margaret and I had bought when we first married. I'd given them to David and Elena years ago. "Dad, really, you don't need to—" David started. My fingers brushed against something taped to the underside of the seat, something flat and small. I pulled it free and straightened up, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. In my hand was an envelope yellowed with age. On the front, in handwriting I would recognize anywhere in the world, was a single word: James. My name, in Margaret's handwriting. "That's impossible," Elena whispered, staring at the envelope. "We've had these chairs for years." I turned the envelope over in my trembling hands, my mind racing. How could this be here? When could Margaret have possibly hidden this, and why tell Sophie about it now, 3 years after her passing? "Open it, Grandpa," Sophie urged, her small face alight with excitement. As I carefully broke the seal on the envelope, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside would change everything. Margaret had left me one final message, and somehow, impossibly, she'd found a way to make sure I received it at exactly the right moment. With unsteady fingers, I pulled out a folded piece of paper and began to read. My dearest James, the letter began in Margaret's flowing script. I had to pause, taking a deep breath as her words washed over me. Even now, years after her passing, seeing her handwriting felt like hearing her voice again. If you're reading this, then our little Sophie has delivered my message. I always knew that child had a special connection to the other side. Don't be frightened, my love. There's nothing supernatural here, just a grandmother's love and a little girl's remarkable intuition. The dining room had fallen completely silent. David stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder. Elena had moved to Sophie's side, her arm around our granddaughter, who was watching me with those knowing eyes. I'm writing this letter during my final days, when the doctors have made it clear that my time is limited. There are things I never told you, James, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you. Now I realize you deserve to know the truth. My hands shook harder. Margaret and I had been married for 42 years. We'd raised our son together, weathered life's storms side by side. What could she possibly have kept from me? Do you remember Thomas Blackwood? The name hit me like a physical blow. Thomas Blackwood had been my business partner 30 years ago. We'd started a construction company together in Hartford, building it from nothing into a successful enterprise. Then one day, Thomas disappeared with nearly all the company's assets, leaving me to face bankruptcy and angry clients. The scandal had nearly destroyed me. If it hadn't been for Margaret's unwavering support, I might not have survived that dark period. What I never told you, the letter continued, is that I found Thomas 3 years after he vanished. He was living under a new name in Arizona. I hired a private investigator when you were at your lowest point. Remember when I told you I was visiting my sister for 2 weeks? I went to confront him instead. I looked up, meeting David's astonished gaze. He knew the story of my financial ruin, of course, but even he didn't know this part. Thomas was dying of cancer when I found him, Margaret's letter revealed. He was filled with remorse, James. He confessed everything, including the fact that he hadn't acted alone. His partner in the theft was someone you trusted even more than him, Robert Chambers. I felt the blood drain from my face. Robert had been my attorney, my friend. He'd helped me through the bankruptcy proceedings, had stood beside me when everything fell apart. He'd even loaned us money to help get back on our feet. Thomas gave me proof, documents showing how Robert helped orchestrate everything, then positioned himself as your savior to alleviate his guilt. I confronted Robert privately. He broke down and admitted everything, begging for forgiveness. He offered financial restitution, but I wanted more. I demanded he set up a trust with the stolen funds plus interest, a trust for our grandchildren's education. My mind reeled with this revelation. Robert had remained our friend until his death 10 years ago. All that time, Margaret had carried this secret. The irony, my darling, is that Robert became a better man after our confrontation. His guilt drove him to help us in ways you never knew. That cabin in New Hampshire, you think he left you in his will. He actually signed it over to us 20 years earlier as part of his penance. I remembered how touched I'd been when Robert's will had revealed that he'd left us the lakeside cabin we'd always admired. It had seemed like a final gesture of friendship. Now I understood it had been something altogether different. There's more, James. The trust for the grandchildren has grown substantially. There's now over $2 million set aside for their education and futures. The account information is with our attorney, Michael Pearson. I've arranged for him to know when to expect your call. If Sophie's dream comes, as I've hoped it would. The room spun slightly. $2 million for the grandchildren. All this time, while I'd been carefully managing my pension and savings, this fortune had been waiting. I know you're wondering why I kept this from you, the letter continued. The truth is complicated. At first I feared what confronting Robert might do to you when you were already so broken. Later, after he'd made amends in his way, I saw how you'd rebuilt your friendship with him. Revealing his betrayal seemed unnecessarily cruel to both of you, and then it simply became my burden to bear alone. I looked up at my family's stunned faces. Jason had put down his phone, totally engaged for the first time all day. Lily had moved closer, reading over my shoulder. Sophie sat calmly, as if she'd known all along what the letter contained. But now, my love, it's time for the truth. Time for you to decide what to do with this knowledge. The money is legally and rightfully yours to manage for our grandchildren. Robert's debt has been paid. I turned to the final paragraph, Margaret's last words to me from beyond the grave. There's one more thing, James. The key to the safe deposit box at First National Bank is taped inside the family Bible, Genesis chapter 1. Everything you need is there. And know this, my darling. In all our years together, keeping this from you was my only secret. My only regret is that I won't be there when Sophie delivers this message and you look beneath the chair. I imagine your face, the surprise in those blue eyes I've loved for a lifetime. Merry Christmas, my love. Take care of our family. Until we meet again, Margaret. I folded the letter carefully, looking up to find David wiping tears from his eyes. Eleanor was openly crying. Even Jason seemed moved. Dad, David said quietly, is this real? Before I could answer, Sophie spoke up. Grandma said you'd find the blue book with the cross on it. She said to look at page 1. I stared at my granddaughter in amazement. The family Bible, bound in blue leather with a silver cross embossed on the cover, had been packed away in my attic for years. Page 1, Genesis chapter 1. David, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I think we need to make a trip to Connecticut tomorrow. As the implications of Margaret's letter sank in, I realized she had given us not just a financial gift, but something far more valuable. A final Christmas miracle that had brought me back to the family I'd been avoiding for too long. The drive to Connecticut the next morning was quiet. Snow blanketed the New England landscape as David navigated his SUV along the interstate, occasionally glancing at me in the passenger seat. We'd left Elena and the children at home. This journey felt like something David and I needed to do alone, father and son. Did you have any idea? David finally asked, breaking the silence as we crossed the state line. About any of this? Robert's betrayal, Mom's confrontation, the trust fund? I watched the familiar landmarks of my home state passing by outside the window. Not a clue, I admitted. Your mother was remarkable in ways I'm still discovering. She protected you, David said softly. All these years, she protected all of us. I corrected him. The Margaret I knew would have torn Robert apart if she hadn't seen genuine remorse. She must have been convinced his redemption was real. The rest of the drive passed with memories. David asking questions about his mother that I'd never thought to share before. Stories from our early days, the struggles we'd faced together. Somehow, Margaret's letter had opened a door between us that had been closed since her funeral. My house stood silent and cold when we arrived, a layer of fresh snow covering the walkway. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it, too tidy, too empty, a home without life in it. You know, David said, surveying the living room, the kids miss this place. They talk about summers here with you and Mom. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak as I headed for the stairs to the attic. The family Bible was exactly where I remembered, in an old trunk beneath faded Christmas decorations. The blue leather cover was dusty, but the silver cross still caught the light when I lifted it from its resting place. With trembling fingers, I opened to Genesis chapter 1. There, taped to the page as Margaret had promised, was a small key. First National, I murmured. It's only a few blocks from here. The bank manager recognized me immediately when we walked in, one of the benefits of living in the same town for 40 years. When I explained about the safe deposit box, she led us to a private room. The key slid into the lock smoothly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Inside the box was a sealed envelope, thicker than the one from beneath the chair, and a small velvet pouch. I opened the envelope first, pulling out several official-looking documents and another handwritten note. James, this new letter began, if you're reading this, you've found the key and come looking for answers. The documents enclosed are the legal papers establishing the trust for our grandchildren. Michael Pearson helped me set everything up properly. The account statements are updated yearly. You'll see how the investments have grown. David leaned over my shoulder, his breath catching as he saw the figures. The trust had indeed grown to over $2 million, carefully invested and managed all these years without my knowledge. "Mom was a financial wizard," David whispered, flipping through the statements. "Look at these returns, even through the recession." But I was more interested in the rest of Margaret's letter. "You'll also find documentation of my conversations with Thomas and Robert. I recorded everything, James, not out of malice, but because I needed proof. I've never shared these with anyone but Michael, who advised me legally throughout this process. What you do with this information now is entirely your choice." There was a flash drive in the envelope along with the papers. Recordings, I assumed, of conversations I never knew had taken place. "The last item in the box is more personal," Margaret's letter continued. "On our 30th anniversary, you gave me a diamond pendant that I treasured. I've had it reset with 3 smaller stones added, one for each of our grandchildren. I want you to give this to Sophie when she turns 16. She may be young now, but that girl has an old soul. She'll understand its significance when the time comes." I reached for the velvet pouch, opening it to find a beautiful pendant. The center diamond, the one I'd given Margaret years ago, was now surrounded by 3 smaller stones, each a different color: a blue sapphire, a green emerald, and a red ruby, representing each grandchild. "She planned everything," I said, my voice breaking. "Even years after she's gone, she's still taking care of us." David put his arm around my shoulders. "That was Mom, always thinking 10 steps ahead." We spent the next hour reviewing the documents. The trust was set up with clear instructions: funds for education, first homes, and seed money for business ventures if the children chose that path. Margaret had thought of everything. As we gathered the papers to leave, I noticed one final note at the bottom of her letter, a postscript I'd overlooked. "P.S. James, the cabin in New Hampshire is where I've been happiest with you. Don't spend another Christmas alone. Our family belongs together, especially during the holidays. Promise me." That evening, as snow fell outside my Connecticut home, David and I sat in the kitchen, talking late into the night. We made calls to Elena, to Michael Pearson, who confirmed everything in Margaret's letters. The pieces of this puzzle my wife had constructed years ago were finally coming together. "Dad," David said as midnight approached, "come back to Boston with me tomorrow, finish Christmas with us. Then maybe we could all go up to the cabin for New Year's. The kids would love it." I thought about my quiet house, the solitude I'd wrapped around myself like armor these past years. And then I thought about Sophie's knowing eyes, Lily's animated stories, even Jason's teenage indifference. My family, Margaret's family. "I think your mother would approve," I said finally. 6 months later, I sold my Connecticut house and bought a small place just 10 minutes from David and Elena in Boston. The family Bible sits on my new coffee table, no longer hidden away. The diamond pendant rests in my bedside drawer, waiting for Sophie's 16th birthday, and Margaret's letters, both of them, are framed on my wall. A reminder that love sometimes works in mysterious ways. Last week, I took Sophie for ice cream. Just the 2 of us. As we sat in the park enjoying our cones, I finally asked the question that had been on my mind since Christmas. "Sophie, about your dream of Grandma. Was it really a dream?" My granddaughter licked her chocolate ice cream thoughtfully before answering. "Not exactly," she said with that peculiar wisdom that still catches me off guard. "It was more like a feeling, like she was telling me something important, and I just knew." "Do you have those feelings often?" I asked carefully. Sophie shrugged. "Sometimes. Mum says I have good intuition." She looked up at me, her eyes, so like Margaret's, serious. "Grandma's not sad anymore, you know. She was sad that you were alone, but not anymore." As we walked home hand in hand, I realized that Margaret's final gift hadn't been the trust fund, or even the revelations about the past. Her final gift had been bringing me back to life, back to family, back to love, and somehow she'd found the perfect messenger in our remarkable granddaughter. "Grandpa, look under the chair," Sophie had said at Christmas lunch. Simple words that had changed everything. I couldn't believe it then, but I believe it now.